As I mentioned earlier, for people who weren't here, we've got more than 70 people registered for tonight. So there are clearly a lot of budding authors out there in our membership, which is exciting. Special thanks to Tim for arranging this. It's been, well, clearly just huge demand, lots and lots of interest. Tim, as many of you will know from Farmers Weekly days, he wrote a suspense novel, What She Left. It was published in 2015 under his pen name TR Richmond. I can thoroughly recommend it. I bought it and suggested it to all of my book club readers. Unfortunately, I live in a very small hamlet, so I couldn't really charge a commission for his sales, but it's a thoroughly recommended book. Then we've got Mark Allen, who took advantage of lockdown to complete his first novel, Life Term, which was published by Columnist Books. With a backdrop of journalism and publishing, the story follows an abused boy who many years later, and working as a psychiatric nurse, takes the opportunity for revenge. So that's a new one to add to the shopping list. Charlie Flindt, Sweet Home Hinton Ampner, The Tenant Farmer's Diary 2015, chronicles the daily goings on of Charlie and his apparently long-suffering family on a Hampshire heavy-land conventional farm. It's billed as a real book about real farming, not bunny hugging and sandal wearing, which I just love. And then finally, we've got Dan Bernard and his wife Gail, who founded Tricorn Books in 2007. They're based in Hampshire and specialise in affordable self-publishing and book printing. They've worked with high-profile national and international clients, as well as many local authors. And I'm guessing by the turnout tonight, there could be a fair amount of demand afterwards. So without further ado, Tim, do you want to take it away?
Yep. Okay. So hello, everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces tonight. What I was going to do was I've just made a sort of a list of some do's and don'ts, really. And these are things that I've picked up along the way, largely through getting it wrong and making mistakes, because writing a book and taking a book through to publication, like any endeavour in life, is a very steep learning curve, and there's no better way of learning, sadly, than getting it wrong. So, and I'm conscious that a lot of you guys out there, I see David's in the audience. David wrote a fantastic memoir a few years ago, so hopefully some of what I say will be useful, but forgive me if some of what I say is stating the bleeding obvious, but I just wrote down some of the things that I figured I learned along the way. So I've got 10 points and I'll try and do a minute-ish on each. So I'll set my phone alarm and hopefully I won't overrun if I do that. First point I would say is, what's your elevator pitch? Now, as journalists and PRs, we kind of think we know all about that. But I would say that's every bit as relevant if you're an author and looking to have a book published as in any other field in life. You need to be able to sum up the book, and this is going to sound incredibly reductive, but you need to be able to sum up the book ultimately in a sentence for it to be most marketable, I would suggest. So you might write a synopsis initially that's 2 pages, and then you might pare it down to a page, and then you might pare it down to a couple of paragraphs. But I would suggest that if you can even trim it beyond that and get it to a sentence, then that's worth doing. So I spent a lot of time doing that with my book, and in a sentence, it's basically the life and death of a young woman told through the digital and paper trail that she left. Why is this important? That's because editors, and Dan will know this more than any of us, but editors and publishers are busy, and you need to make a quick, impactful first impression. When an agent tries to sell a book to a publisher, if they've got an elevator pitch, that helps them. When a publisher's trying to convince their marketing and PR team that this is an exciting book, if they've got an elevator pitch, that helps them. When publishing sales reps are going out around bookshops, if they've got a quick, pithy, snappy elevator pitch, it helps them. So all the way through the sales process, I would say, think of your elevator pitch, hone it and nail it. Point 2, research your targets. And forgive me, I'm skipping around slightly here between the actual mechanics of writing and the process of trying to get the book published. But point two, research your targets. I'm thinking in particular at the point that you're ready to approach either an agent or a publisher. Don't just send out 50 emails to dear sir or madam, because we all want to feel special, and actually find out which publishing company publishes exactly the type of work you do. Do they publish that genre? Do they have a specialism in your field? And drill down beyond that. Don't just find the right publishing company or the right agenting company. Look on the website, look on social media, and actually find out a particular agent or a particular editor, because you might well find that there's someone who is looking for or particularly interested in your field of work. So one tip that I was given that was really useful, I mean, you can't do it right now, but after COVID, someone said to me, go into bookshops, look at books on the shelves that are similar to the ones that you're writing, and often authors will give an acknowledgement to their agent or their editor. So that's a really good little insight into agents and editors that are working in the area that you're looking to write about, because you've then got a name. You can then send a name to that person. The profession's more open than it was a few years ago. Agents and publishers are on social media, so you can actually get in touch with them. You can hook up with them. You can kind of connect with them. All I'll say is, and I'll tell you in a minute why I perhaps fell foul of this, is there's a very fine line between trying to engage with someone on social media and becoming a stalker. And obviously I wouldn't recommend the latter. And that is a line that I, in a professional capacity, I have crossed on a number of occasions, and I'll tell you why later. But point three, find your writing routine. So that varies for everybody. Some people like working in the morning, some people like burning the midnight oil, some people like working little and often. Some writers I know take a week's holiday every 3 months and lock themselves away on their own, away from their families. Just find out what works for you and stick to it. I like early mornings, so I actually found that Cafe Nero in Sutton High Street was where I wrote my book. I went there every day at 6 o'clock in the morning and stayed there till 8 o'clock in the morning, and did that for 18 months or 2 years. And that routine was sacrosanct to me. I wouldn't miss that. And if I found that writing every single day helped me build a momentum, help me keep going, really. So understand what your routine is, and there's no right or wrong place to write, but be realistic about where you can write, and be realistic about what interruptions and what nuisances you can kind of acceptably tolerate. Have a decent writing chair, have a decent writing table. These things sound small, but actually if you've got backache and you're trying to balance your laptop on your sausages and mash on your lap, it doesn't work. So get a routine, get a place, get a space, and stick to it. Point four, balance vision and feedback. So you've got a book in mind, you know what you want to write about, you feel strongly about it, that's brilliant, you need to. But at various stages along the way, people are going to give you feedback, and people are going to tell you things that perhaps slightly conflict with your vision of the book. And I think an editor once said to me, successful authors are people that can hang on to their vision and retain that passion for their vision, but they're not so conceited perhaps that they won't flex on that. So you have to learn to take feedback, and you have to listen to feedback, and you find people whose feedback you trust, and that might be, it might be your family, but your family on the whole tends to be quite nice. Well, mine don't, but some families do. Hello, Isabel. Some people do. But it might be colleagues, it might be a little writing peer group. I've found that I've got 3 or 4 other writers that I really trust, and we kind of bounce ideas off each other, and we're honest with each other, but we try and be constructive. So balance, vision, and feedback. Point 5, when to pitch your book to an agent or a publisher. People have different views on this. My sense is, and it's not always what people want to hear, but my sense is don't approach an agent or a publisher until you've got a very decent chunk of your book written. Because I know people that have gone to publishers when they've got 3 chapters written, and they're fantastic 3 chapters, and they've got a brilliant pitch. And what's the first thing the publisher says? I love this. I'd love to read the rest. Ah, okay, I've got a problem. I can't get it to you for another 3 months or 6 months or a year, by which time, guess what? That agent's moved publishing house, or they've run out of budget to acquire books, or they've died in a gutter of alcoholism. So, you know, you want to be able to pounce at the moment you get some interest. So I feel pitch it when you've got, you know, when you've got it all written. You've just got to be patient. You can, some publishers don't like this, but I would say you can submit to more than one publisher at once, because, you know, if you submit to one publisher and wait for a response, you could be waiting. You know, you might be lucky and wait a week, but you might equally wait 3 months. So you can spend your life waiting. So I tended to submit to more than one at once. Not everyone thinks that's perhaps necessarily the right approach, but hey, you know, life's short, and you know, as a fledgling author, the cards are stacked against you. So load them back in your favour by making multiple submissions, I would say. Point 6, how to pitch to an agent or editor. I mean, this is a science in itself, but as a very general point, I would say send them a cover letter, send them a synopsis, and send them the first 3 chapters. Don't send them your best 3 chapters, send them your first 3 chapters, because they want to read how the book's going to start. The synopsis is not the blurb on the back of the book. Don't try and be enigmatic and entice them. Don't try and give them clues as to what might happen and think you're going to make them want to come back for more. The synopsis should say exactly what happens in what order. And the cover letter, I would say treat that as a job application letter. Make it professional, make it business-like. You know, do all the things you do in your professional life. Make sure it's elegant, make sure it's free of typos, and make it a convincing sell of yourself. And don't be tempted at that point, I would say, to try and showcase how imaginative you are by wrapping it up in a basket and putting a pink bow on the top. They want a letter that tells them what you're writing. And this is when I said earlier on about how I sort of crossed the line of becoming a stalker. When I first sent out a few submissions, I thought I'd be really clever. This was like donkey's years ago, before email. And I sent publishers submissions in the post, and I enclosed a Kit Kat. And my cover letter had an oh so funny line saying, "Have a break and read my synopsis. Please find Kit Kat enclosed." I thought this was very clever, and I thought this would wow publishers. I went to a conference a couple of years later and got talking to an editor, and she randomly was talking about all the nutcases out there that send her letters. And she said one crank a few years ago even sent me a Kit Kat. So I said, God, what sort of person would ever do that? No, point 7, know your genre. In my experience, and Dan will know more about this than I am, there's nothing that terrifies an editor more than an author that says, I won't be confined by genre, darling. I work across genres, and I won't be straight-jacketed by anything so confining as a genre. Publishers like to know what you're writing, and they like to be able to put it in a genre. So know what genre you're writing in. Tips right now, there's something called uplit, which is getting talked about quite a lot. Post-COVID, I get the sense that editors are looking for some feel-good stories, and uplit is, perhaps a genre of more positive fiction that perhaps celebrates the individual and the family. So that's worth thinking about. There's 2 websites that are read by the publishing industry. I think they're subscription only, but one's called Book Brunch and the other one's called The Bookseller, and they're quite a good indication of what publishers are buying. So there's some quite useful insights on there. Point 8, I was going to say, and I'll miss this because I'm running out of time. I was going to say what makes a compelling character, but we can talk about that separately if need be. Point 9, does working in journalism or PR give you an edge? In a nutshell, absolutely. You know about deadlines, you know about taking feedback, you know about editing, you know about the importance of your first and last line. You have a lot of practice at pitching ideas if you're a freelance, or indeed if you're a staffer trying to sell, the idea of free junkets to your boss and overseas trips. So you know about being persuasive, you know about the value of PR and marketing, you know about selling yourself. Being a successful author, not that I am, I hasten to say, but I think one of the tricks of being a successful author seems to be about being able to tread the line between being a huge self-publicist and being quite humble at the same time. So you've kind of got to thrust yourself into the spotlight, but not be a sort of a complete arsehole with it if you can. And that's a bit of a balancing act. And just finally, perhaps an often overwritten and overlooked point is, why are you doing this? You're doing it probably because you enjoy it. You've got something to say and you enjoy writing. That's kind of why a big reason of why we all do the jobs we do. And it's easy to forget that. Sometimes when you're immersed in the process of writing a book, and it can be quite stressful, and when you're pitching or meeting deadlines with a book, it can be hassle, and it can be aggro, and it can be stressful, but at the end of the day it's really enjoyable, and there's nothing more satisfying or fulfilling than seeing a book come to fruition and seeing it on the shelves. And so enjoy, and keep going. I hope that was okay, Olivia. That's kind of a very hopefully not too superficial whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure the others will elaborate on some of those points, and we can always, draw out more in questions if you'd like to.
That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Tim. And top tips on not sending Kit Kats, which is an interesting one. Next up, we've got Mark. So I shall hand straight over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Olivia. And I'd like to congratulate Tim for this kind of initiative. It's a really great initiative, and so thank you very much for inviting me. And I'd like to pay my regards to two very special friends of mine, Dennis Chamberlain and Annie Chamberlain. Dennis was a very distinguished editor of Farmers Weekly, which obviously I now own, and Annie was a news editor. I have to tell you one very brief story. They did invite us, my wife and I, and our very young little son, up to their farm, or Annie's parents' farm in Ayrshire in Scotland. And we'd arrived there, and after 10 minutes, their very handsome dog took a kind of shine to my son, who was, I think, 2 or 3 years old at the time, and bit his nose off. But fortunately, he recovered, and he always remembers that situation very, very kindly. So anyway, that's my old friends, Dennis and Annie. But I shouldn't really say very much more about that story, because it was very nice of them to invite us. Anyway, I just wanted to, Tim has really sort of set the scene very well, and he said most of the things that I want to say. But I just want to say a little bit about my book, which actually just came. I got the first press copy that came today. It was rather tragically left overnight on a waste bin, so it's sogging wet. So it's going to be printed next week, and it will be published on the 15th of March. And as Olivia has said, I'll just, she's described very briefly the synopsis. The synopsis is about a 6-year-old boy who is sexually abused at random on a riverbank in deepest Somerset, with really devastating consequences, and which he never gets over. And many years later, working as a psychiatric nurse, he meets his abuser face to face and is able to exact revenge. But it's something that he lives with for the rest of his life. It's a deep secret, and although he becomes quite successful, he never can get rid of that kind of guilt and shame. So the book starts in prison and ends in prison. And I suppose, and it sounds very kind of pompous and grandiose, but the book really tries to kind of examine themes. I mean, it's a kind of psychological thriller. So I like to believe that you can actually read the book on different levels. You can read it as hopefully a good story that keeps you kind of spellbound. There are some twists and turns, but it also tries to, and this sounds probably very pompous, but it tries to examine things like crime, punishment, revenge, retribution, all those different kind of attitudes, which are very redundant in a lot of kind of novels, and those are things that interest me. The difference between good and bad, because most of us have good qualities and bad qualities. So even in prison, there are some very redeeming things and some very nice situations that happen in prison. But it also looks at kind of child abuse. And I grew up in deeper Somerset in the 50s, and child abuse was hushed under the kind of the carpet, so to speak, but it was there. Incest and child abuse was in the local communities of which I was a part. And if you want to talk to me more about that, I will be glad to answer any questions. But it was there, and these were very closed, isolated communities. So I wanted to look at that as well. So, I mean, Tim talked about the reasons why people write. There are two reasons why I wanted to write. The first reason, as I've just explained, I wanted to look at this issue, and to some extent, it was cathartic. And I'll say no more about that. But also, the second reason, the powerful reason that, I've been a journalist, and although I now run a company, I'm still first and foremost a journalist. And I've written lots of things, but most things have been, 1,500 words at the very most. So I wanted to see whether I had the capacity, the stamina and the skill to sustain a book of 100,000 words or more. And when I started writing the book, I really wrote it for my own satisfaction. I didn't necessarily write it for publication. And so once I had finished writing the book, as I said, I'd accomplished my main feat to write the book. I then showed the book to one or two literary friends of mine, and they said, they really liked the book, and they encouraged me to seek a publisher. They encouraged me to have it published. So I wrote to the leading literary agency in the country, and I got back a very good response from them, very favorable response. They liked the book, they liked the way it had been written, but they asked me to examine to write a subsidiary plot in the book. And I thought there was one already there. And I was very busy, and I thought I just can't be bothered at the time. So I left it at bay. And then, so I thought, well, I've established my main point. I've written the book. I was never going to sub-publish it, although my company has published novels. But if I was going to publish a book at all, it needed to have some kind of self-authentication. I wanted it to go through a proper process. But so, I thought, well, let's leave it there. And then about 2 years ago, a friend of mine who's a published author, he said, why don't you send your book to my publisher, Cadenza book, very, very good editor called Anthony Hurst. And so anyway, I sent it in, and he wrote back, and I got the very best advice from him. And he sent back about 2 or 3 pages of notes and saying, look, I really like the book. It's a very good book, but in my view, for me to publish it, which I like to do, it needs to be written in the first person. I've written it in the third. And instead of going in and out of time, I think you should tell the story chronologically. So again, I was very, very busy at work, and I thought I just can't be bothered to do it. And so I let it rest. And then it came to April or May of last year, and he phoned me up and got in touch with me again. And he said, what's happened to the book? And I said, I don't know, I'm just letting it matters rest. And he said, go on, have a go at it. He says, it's a really good book, but you need to write it in the first person, and you need to tell the story chronologically. So I thought, if I'm ever going to write it, I got an opportunity in lockdown, although it was an incredibly stressful period, for my company, for all companies. I thought I got the time to do it. So I decided I'd have a bash. So I was getting up every morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, And I was writing from 3 to 8 o'clock. No one knew apart from my wife. I was rewriting the book, which but to write it in the first person, it was a colossal exercise. I had to do a lot of new writing, and I didn't let anyone know I was writing. And so from 3 to 8 o'clock, I was writing the book. Then I was on company business during the day. We're having regular, Zoom-like meetings with the company. Then I'd go back to writing the book again in the evening and revising it. So that was my routine for about 2 or 3 months, rewriting the book. And then, I sent it in and he liked it. And obviously, since the last few months, we've been going through a fairly exacting kind of, process of editing the book. So, what lessons have I learned from the whole of this process? Well, clearly, I think that I've wasted an awful lot of time by writing the book wrongly in the first place. And I wish I'd had the advice I had from my, editor. In other words, that, I should have written the book, told the story chronologically. I should have written it in the first person. And the one thing that I have understood about the whole of this process, and I won't make the same mistake again, is something called chronology. And if you're writing a book, it's really, really important. If you're writing a book, it's really, really important to have a map out the whole of the book, almost like an Archer saga, that the date of everyone's birthday, when they're born, what they do for a living, all those different things. Because if you're going backwards and forwards a little bit, you don't need to have that. And I wish although I worked out chapter by chapter plot lines of all the book, I didn't do it accurately enough. And so, when it came to rewriting the book, it was quite an enormous effort. It was like kind of putting together a jigsaw. And so I've learned an awful lot about the importance of chronology. That if I'd had a clearer idea at the start, I would have written it so differently. Now, Tim's already covered some of the other points. I think, when you're writing a book, it's very important to know, who you're targeting your book at, what sort of genre it is. Is it a psychological thriller? Is it a detective story? Is it a historical novel? If it is a novel at all, what genre? Or are you writing the book just for your own satisfaction? And I think that, again, if you're writing the book commercially, in other words, you want to try and make some money out of it, and I don't think there's an awful lot of, unless you become a best-selling author, there's probably not a lot of money to be made out of it. It is important to know what why you're writing it and who you're aiming it at. In my case, my book doesn't really neatly fall into any particular genre. It's a psychological thriller, but as I've tried to indicate, I think you can read the book on different levels. So I think it's very important to know who you're targeting in the book and why you're targeting it. Tim has spoke very eloquently about, writing routine. This is a very, very important thing. Now, in my case, I'm not someone who can dip in and out of, I wish I could, getting up at 6 o'clock, although I did it over lockdown. But when I first wrote the book, I took myself off to France weeks at a time. So I wrote the book in the course of about 2 years, going off to France by myself for 1 week or 10 days, just immersing myself. I was living in a total bubble. All I could think about one day to the next was this book and the plot lines. And I was advancing, going over the plot lines by myself and also with 1 or 2 friends, day after day. And the only reason I really could write the book is I set myself, disciplines. And I, which were quite hard. I said to myself that I would write 2,500 words every single day, come what may. And that was incredibly exacting. I think that was too tough. I mean, if I had my time again, I think 1,500 words, or at the most 2,000, is really about most that I think I could manage successfully. Because it is a very, very lonely, wearying, enjoyable, exhilarating process, but it knackers you to death. Well, that's my experience. I don't know if other people would agree. So I think 2,500 words is a lot to write. And, and then obviously I'd write the book and I would go over it again in the evening. And then you get up the next day and you start the whole process again, feeling really, really tired. And then, when you're writing the book, I don't know if Tim or anyone else does that process, but, even though I had a kind of mapped out the whole of the book, what was the exciting bit about the book is your mind takes you in certain directions and you go down routes that you weren't planning to go down. And that was some of the best writing that I enjoyed the most, was suddenly a little idea comes out of the middle of a chapter and you explore that route, and it leads you in a lot of cases into something which I found quite quite exciting. I think when you're writing the book, and these are all quite obvious points, it's very important to know who your characters are and to evolve your characters. And I don't know where my characters arrived at. I mean, in my book, and I have to be very careful because there's a bit of sex in the book, but there are 4 women characters in the book. None of them is, in my view, I know none of those people. They're all out of my imagination and out of my own head. And actually what is surprising about it, that you find your characters speaking in a voice that is totally alien to you. I don't tend to swear very much. Now, obviously, the backdrop of my book is also about journalism and publishing. If you've ever worked in a newsroom and on a newspaper, I worked on both evening newspapers and national newspapers, people swear a lot. So I've tried to use the language which I heard when I was working in a newsroom. It's not my language. And some of the things that when I read the book again, I'm quite shocked at the language that comes out of the book, but it's not my language. I'm trying to invent the kind of the language that other people kind of honestly use. And again, sort of, that painting the backdrop, I've used my own, the trajectory of my own career and knowledge about publishing and journalists to be the backdrop. So what I've done is actually, there are some facts, there's whole layers of fiction. Most of it's fiction, but I've used some facts in order to kind of explore a lot of fiction. So, most of it comes out of my imagination, but I've talked about things that I know. The things that I also found almost the most enjoyable was a dialogue. So out of all my characters, I've tried to use their voices. And again, I found that sort of quite interesting, quite exciting. Tim sort of mentioned about, getting feedback. We're all, and most of us are writers or journalists, we're all kind of bit sensitive souls in lots of ways, but it's very important that you do get feedback from people whose opinion you value. That is absolutely crucial. And not be kind of, if they disagree with something, not to be offended. I've been very lucky to have a lot of feedback, and most of it's been very, very positive, and most of it's been extremely kind of, very, very constructive. And finally, Tim mentioned about trying to find an agent, and most books go through an agency. Some go directly to a publisher, but most of them go through an agency. What I think is the most crucial thing, if you can choose your publisher beforehand, great. Try and get a good publisher. But in particular, I believe the crucial thing is to get a good editor. I've been very lucky to have an incredibly bright and able editor, some small publishing company, but he's an absolutely meticulous editor. And not only does he improve your kind of faulty syntax, and we all have, or I certainly have, faulty syntax, but he questions every sentence you write. So if you're writing about whatever it is, their troubles, and all these things come up in the book, he questions all your facts. And I found that, although sometimes it's very irritating because, you don't want to be questioned all the time and you're very tired, to have that questioning all the time. So every single fact is up for scrutiny. And, so I think choosing a good editor is absolutely very important. I think all good authors have a good editor by their side. So I think that's very important. So those are the main points of what I want to say. And I really think that everyone who's involved, as a kind of, as a journalist or involved in the guild, we've all got books to write. Every single person in this room can write a book. We've all got in it to write a book. And I really hope that, lots of you here will take the initiative and write your own books, because I'm certain that all of you, if I can write a book, then everyone else can as well. So if you've got any questions later on, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really fascinating, hearing about the different ways of writing a book and taking yourself off to France for weeks on end. versus COVID lockdown very early in the morning. So yeah, really, really helpful. Thank you. Next up, we've got Charlie Flindt, who, like the rest of our speakers, needs very little introduction. You're muted, Charlie.
Yes, right. Good evening. Yes, thank you, Oliver. I'm the stranger in the room here. I'm just a farmer who kept a diary. And all farmers keep diaries. And I'm in awe of Mark and Tim, who could sit down and do the discipline and the fiction and keep the consistency and the characters. And all I did is do what I've done as a farmer since 1984. I sat down and kept a diary. Dad always kept a diary. We've got about 60 years worth of them up in the attic, sitting there. They're very boring. They just say, it rained, harrowed the back meadow. That's about it. Never going to sell those. I decided in 2015 to do a longer version. I thought I'd do 1,000 words a day, something like that. What I did today, but proper spread out every single aspect of a farm. A modern farm, a conventional farm, a chemical-based farm, like most farms, not the niche farms. There are so many books out there covering the niche farms. Some of them I've read 2 or 3, and they are truly terrible. What they get away with saying about us conventional farmers is shocking. Better not name names. Today, my niece is working on, she's had a best-selling book about the law. She's a barrister. She's going to do a book about farming. This morning, my cricket captain rang up and he's doing a book about farming. Goodness knows where he sold household goods once he'd given up in the army, but now he's doing a book about farming. There are loads of them, but I don't think anyone, I'm perfectly entitled to be wrong, I don't think anybody's done books about my sort of farming, which is paracetamol farming, let's call it that. You're using chemicals to produce perfectly safe food. I've got a wonderful looking farm. I've got National Trust visitors all over it, so it can't be that unbeautiful. It's absolutely stunning, and we apply as much chemicals as the next man. So I got to 140,000 words in the end with mine, and it was just sitting on the computer one day. And I thought to myself, if I don't do something with that, we'll have a lightning strike and it'll be gone. It'll get frizzled. So started asking around what to do with it. Know a couple of people who know a couple of people, and spoke to a couple of publishers and 1 or 2 agents, and you might as well have presented a plate of nuclear waste. Oh no, we don't do that. Oh, we don't do that farming. Oh dear. One did make me laugh and said, oh no, you only do the exciting days. I said, well, that's no, they're all exciting days at Manor Farm. I can't edit out any days. Anyway, didn't do very well. Thought about self-publishing. My next door neighbour is Richard Curtis's agent, so knows a thing or 2 about these things. And he said, for goodness sakes, have a go at self-publishing. He said, we love self-publishing these days. It's dead easy. And if you have a huge success, which you won't, of course, Charlie, of course you won't, you know. He said, then one of the big boys might pick it up and take it over. But we love it if you lot take the risks and the self-publishers take a risk. Got onto the internet, found Dan at Tricorn Books, and Dan shrugged his shoulders, said, yeah, whatever, send it through. And then said, well, that's rather good, let's have a go. So he and his, I've forgotten her name now, and I and the 3 of us, we kept being a control freak. It was lovely having nobody else in the loop. The 3 of us read it over and over and over and over. So there wasn't a lot of editing or work or just typos and stuff like that. We chose a couple of dozen photographs, put them in, and out it came. And the lovely people at Farmers Weekly allowed me to push it once or twice, and I'm up to 3,000 copies sold. The other place not to go and try and sell a book about conventional farming is a Shishi Hampshire bookshop, where once again you will get the, oh my God, oh no, organic yak's milk or nothing, please. So, right, I use Boo Hiss Baddie Amazon, and I used eBay, and I've used kitchen table sales, and I've used a farm marketplace, which is a small agricultural retailer that ticks along quite nicely. And blame me, I've got to 3,000. Great delight in telling Richard Goder's agent that, yes, I have made a chunk of money. Yes, I am buying a new shotgun with the proceeds. I've had a lovely, one of the great things about selling on Amazon, boo hiss Amazon, is the personal contact I get, and people realise I'm selling it off the kitchen table and I'm the retailer at the other end. I also, incidentally, said in the Farmers Weekly, for goodness sakes, if you want to send me a check and that'll be fine. I've had some fantastic letters and fantastic checks. I've had money orders from our friends in the Irish Republic that you just have to turn around and send back and say, no, that won't, that's not right. Anyway, if I ever tour the country again, I'll never need a bed and breakfast. I've had so many lovely invites from people saying, oh, you must come and stay, turn right just after Dublin Airport, all that sort of stuff. So I'm quite different to Mark and Tim, because all I've done is sat down, kept a diary, and with Dan's help, got it out there, and it's done extremely well. And then I've just finished another one, which I started on the 1st of February last year, which was supposed to be about Brexit and its repercussions, and it sort of got diverted to other matters. And I can't decide what to call it. I can't decide whether to call it the Brexit book, the lockdown book, the virus book, the drought book, the mask book. I can't. It's going to be a big cover, by the way, Dan, I want to warn you. So I cannot give much advice on this. All I did was sit down and do what farmers always do, but 1,000 words a day instead of 6 or 7. So not a lot of help, really.
So it's all about potluck. Thank you, Charlie. Next up, we can hear about the other end of the supply chain, as it were. Daniel, please give us an insight into how it all works.
Hi. Can you all hear me? Yep. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Charlie. It was great fun seeing you again and hearing about. It just reminds me of what a fantastic fun book that was to work on with you. And it was really easy, wasn't it? And you're definitely one of our most successful authors. What I hope to do is, through some anecdotes and stories, is explain how we work as Tricorn Books, because I guess we've come to publishing, self-publishing, independent publishing through quite a strange route. So originally we set up in 2008. I was working as a teacher in Chichester with my wife, and we decided that it really wasn't for us anymore being told what to do, and we needed to diversify and maybe start practicing what we preached, which was quite a scary thing to do. So we set up as a photography studio and design agency in Portsmouth. And obviously in 2008, this wasn't the best thing to do with the crash around the corner. And at one point, one Christmas gal turned to me and said, you do realise we don't actually have any money whatsoever. I don't think this was a very good idea. And a few days later, we had a phone call from a local academic and historian, Celia Clark, who said, I was wondering if you guys could help me. I've written a book. Nobody's interested. I've contacted publishers and they're very snottily telling me this isn't for us. It's never going to work. It's poorly written. What do I do? So I did what any normal person would do and said, yeah, of course, I'll do it for you. No problem. And then talked her through what we could do, then turned to my wife and said, do you think we could publish a book? And she said, yeah, of course, no problem. So the next stage, we received numerous plastic bags, envelopes, emails, handwritten notes from Celia over a period of 6 weeks. And eventually she delivered her entire book about the Tricorn Centre in Portsmouth, hence the name of the company, Tricorn Books, because this was our first title. So the next stage was finding out about the process. As a graphic designer, trained graphic designer, my wife comes from a marketing and design background. We knew we could put a book together, but that's not the whole story. So I contacted a few publishers, contacted a few printers, and they said, hey, no problem, just set up as a self-publisher, come up with a good logo, start advertising and see what happens. So it's exactly what we did. And 6 months later, we published Celia's first book about the Tricorn Centre, and she sold 1,000 copies. And through that, we were introduced to local architects, local writers, local artists, friends of hers, friends of her family. And lo and behold, as one of the only sort of publishers in Hampshire, the book started pouring in. And I think in the first year, we did 50 or 60 books, a huge range, different books about Montgomery, of local football teachers, novels, sci-fi novels, all kinds of different things. So it was quite an exciting time. Sorry, I'm going to have to refer to my notes as well. So one of the most exciting things was the learning curve, going from standing still to running as a publisher. This doesn't sit too well with some people, but obviously from a creative background, our initial idea was to create beautiful books, because I had this idea, that writers write and designers and self-publishers design. So we looked to find the best printers, the best papers, the best finishes, the best photographers to work with us and generate a company that could develop possibly artistic books, bespoke books, because we knew we couldn't compete with any of the large companies doing exactly what we did. So we tried to do something completely unique and satisfy the artistic needs of local writers, authors, photographers, because we don't just specialize in novels. We do photographic books, artist books, children's books, collections. We've done collections of 6 books that have been case bound in slip cases. So it's more about the beauty of books and the love of design, the love of typography, and also the stories that our authors deliver. Rather than working on one book for a year, I've got 5 books on the desk at the moment. So I've got 5 clients that I'm talking to on a daily basis on a range of subjects, from warriors in Afghanistan to what's the best way to show a giant drinking. So it's from our point of view, it's a very, very exciting and interesting profession to get into. So that's a little about Tricorn Books and how we set up. And what I wanted to do next was talk about the process of what we go through, how we receive books, and an initial discussion, which is very different from how a traditional publishing house would work, where you submit a manuscript and you discuss the editorial aspects, which Mark and Tim, described so wonderfully there. But what we do, we advertise on Google, which seems to be the most sensible advertising base. And as I said, my wife comes from a marketing background, and this was very well considered to pinpoint exactly where we needed to spend our money for maximum results. So we're up on Google as Hampshire Publishers, specialising in self-publishing and independent publishing. So I hope that when clients contact us, they know exactly what they're getting, because the opening page of our website describes exactly that. And I like to quickly get to the point that it's something that's paid for. We're not a traditional publishers. And this doesn't stop. Quite a lot of people do call me with ideas that, and it's wonderful how many of them have already been pitched to film producers in London that it's been suggested would make fantastic movies. And if it wouldn't make a fantastic movie, it's obviously going to make the pair of us a lot of money, because a lot of people have shown a lot of interest. And I quickly move on to, that's fantastic. I'd really like to have a look, but have you had a look at the website? Do you know how much roughly this is going to cost? Because it does come down to money. And then quickly it turns into, well, you're just vanity press, and I don't really think I'm interested anyway, which I've always thought was quite a lovely insult, because if you leveled the same thing at a painter, producing artwork because you want to, because you're inspired by it, it's not exactly an insult, but it's said to me as an insult quite often, and I really don't mind. But moving on to the next part. once we've established that it's a process that's paid for, what I try to do is work out a way of delivering a book that's cost effective to the author and also leaves the author in a position to understand how much it's going to cost to make some money back, because we do try to make sure that all our authors actually get their money back. And it's quite a simple process. If you look at, these aren't the exact figures, but if you imagine it's going to cost you £1,000 to publish and produce your book, and it's going to cost you £1,000 to print your book, it's cost you £2,000. So you need to sell 200 books at £10 each. Okay, that's a really simple equation to look at. But what that doesn't take into account is bookshops taking their 35 to 45% percentage. It doesn't take into account postage and packing. I did hear of an author once not realizing that you can get purchasers on eBay to actually pay for their P&P beforehand. So obviously if you sold a few thousand books and you haven't got the author to pay for the post and packaging, you've lost quite a lot of money there. So that was quite a terrible story to hear. So it's working out a percentage cost with authors. And once we've established that they maybe have a few thousand to spend, and that's what they're willing to spend, we look at how many books they need to order to get their money back. The next stage is looking at, what kind of book you're looking at. Is this an art piece or is this a commercially viable venture? Most people come to me wanting a hardback book with gold foil, dust jacket, with the most exquisite silk paper. And then I have to explain that does actually cost a hell of a lot of money. And would it be better to go for slightly cheaper paper stock, slightly smaller book, go softback, but actually make it affordable so you can sell some copies and make a profit? And very, very quickly, when I explain how much a hardback book costs to produce, we go on an A5 paperback. So it does come down to money, what we do, but it's also a hell of a lot of fun for the author. And I think we take a lot of the stress out of the project by getting across that this is about them. It's an artist. What I hate to do is remove the voice of the author. With Charlie's book in particular, within a few paragraphs, you can see that Charlie can write. And there was nothing I could say that would make him a better writer. It was just give him the confidence just to write and let's produce a beautiful book in your voice. And it worked perfectly. And I'm so pleased because I'm not at all surprised at the amount you sold, Charlie. But one thing I would like to talk about is it isn't just down to producing, paperback novels. We have actually done quite a few exciting, high-profile books that challenge the notion of self-publishing. And it's a story I'd like to tell simply because it does give people more confidence in what we do, to hear of some of the clients we've had. A few years ago, I was working in the office on my own. The phone went, I answered it, and a very posh voice said, "This is Major Dancy calling from Knightsbridge Barracks in London for the Household Cavalry." I said, good. I didn't believe him at all. I thought it was my brother having a laugh, but eventually it transpired it was Major Dancy. And he said, "We're looking at doing a book for the Household Cavalry, and it's about following the Queen for a year as a Royal Lifeguard from the royal wedding all the way through to the state opening of Parliament. And what we want is a photographic book that's been written and photographed by our soldiers and a couple of professional photographers to sell at the end of the year to open our Household Cavalry charity." And I said, "Yep, I think we can probably do that for you. That shouldn't be a problem," which turned into quite a fateful year for us. So we went for a meeting in Knightsbridge Barracks. Me and my wife turned up, and unfortunately there were a few other publishers there, some very, very famous publishing houses with logos you can all recognise. And we sat in this meeting, and the Household Cavalry wanted to know what we could actually all bring to the table and how much money we could make them. And I think most of the publishing houses made the huge mistake of thinking that the cavalry would be impressed by their history. So when it came to producing the book, they talked about editing and what it's like to produce a real book, but they were only offering sort of between 5 and 10% on every book. But they were talking about printing 30,000 books, giving them 10%, which the guys actually thought was fantastic. But when the commanding officer turned to us, me and my wife looked at each other, and I just said, well, how about we don't charge you for the design, we'll do the photography for free, and you can take all the profit from every book you sell. And I think we could probably get 30 quid a book for it. So the commanding officer smiled and said, yeah, okay, I think we'll go with you. So, and that actually happened. So we spent a year following the Household Cavalry, working in Whitehall, working in Parliament, hanging out with members of the royal family, hanging out on horses. And we produced a 240-page, full-colour hardback book, delivered 10,000 copies to Knightsbridge Barracks. And unfortunately, the only one that we lost was the Queen's copy, which I had to deliver to the palace because she'd very kindly written a handwritten forward for us, which I picked up. So the only one that was stolen was the leather-bound version for the Queen. And what I wanted to get across with that story is not how wonderful we are, but the kind of people who approach us are looking not to be told what to do, but are very aware of what they need and are very aware of the commercial environment that books live in. And the Household Cavalry knew what they wanted, but they wanted a self-publisher because they wanted us to sit with them and produce the book that they wanted. And this is fantastic because we worked for them, within 6 months, I've been commissioned by the Royal Navy to fly to the Falkland Islands and do a book about the people, the lifestyle and the architecture of the Falklands, which couldn't be more exciting. We ended up swimming with dolphins in the South Atlantic, being flown to far-flung islands, photographing penguins and killer whales. And again, this isn't about how wonderful we are, but how what we do very quickly changes to large companies realize that they can get exactly what they want affordably and realize the full cover price, because at the end of the day it does come down to money, because lots of self-published authors do make money, and more people are finding out about this, and this is what the cavalry found, this is what the Royal Navy found. And realistically, me and Gail set this company, there's only 5 of us working for the company, but we brought something new to the table. So we brought a uniqueness, I think, to self-publishing and independent publishing that fits into a slot. We're not traditional editors or book people, but we love design. Okay, so that's enough about the people and clients. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we hand over to some questions was why I feel that some books succeed and some books fail in the self-publishing idiom. Charlie had a very successful book that's been remarkable to watch. He didn't mention it, but at one point he was #1 above Greta Thunberg and on the Amazon environmental agriculture. And doing what we do to see one of your authors get to those lofty heights, when you see the figures, if you look at Amazon closely, you can see your sales ranking or sellers ranking. Most authors are up in the millions, but Charlie went to #1. And it was fantastic to post this on social media, and it was true. And we knew he was getting all the money, and I thought that was fantastic. But it's not down to us in the slightest. It was down to Charlie's fantastic writing and the fact that he's a writer and he works for the Farmers Weekly, and he's not happy to get dirty, to get out there, to self-promote, not in an egotistical way, but just say, hey, I've got a good book. Those of you that know Charlie can probably understand that. Another successful author who's done well with us was a polar explorer, Alex Hibbert, who I think has done 5 books with us now, and he's managed to sell 1,000 copies of each of his books. me and Alex design them together. You know, we have the ideas. He goes off, he'll disappear to Greenland for 6 months, live with the local indigenous people, hire dog sleds and disappear off into the ice, come back, write a book, go through the traditional publisher's process, but then between us, we self-publish his books. He then disappears, but does talks all over the world, all over the UK, about his experience as a polar explorer. And on the back of that, he sells his books. And he's more than happy to invest whatever it takes in the publication and the printing to get where he wants to be. And now he's listed with gardeners, he's getting great sales, and he's actually picking up orders nationally from Waterstones. These are two authors that have things in place to make their books work, which I think is really important, and they're commercially successful. Another variant on that was a sci-fi author. One of our very first books, I had a phone call from someone who was very nervous and said he was in fact bipolar. He wasn't enjoying this conversation, but he just felt he had to tell me what happened to him. He'd woken up in a puddle, he'd been arrested for criminal damage and was imprisoned overnight in the police cell in Bristol. While he was in the police cell, he had a bipolar incident and had a story downloaded into his head. I thought, okay, he's a wacko. But for the next hour, he told me the story, and I literally sat there listening to his story for an hour, and it was remarkable. I've never been so excited. And I said, look, mate, I don't care what it costs. Drive down and we'll publish your book. And he said, how much? I said, I don't know, I don't care. I just want to publish this book for you. So this was one of our first traditionally published books. So he brought the manuscript to us, and it was awful. It was so badly written. It was incredible. But the actual basis of his story was staggering. So over the next year, me and my wife tried to piece it together as a story. We had it edited twice. We had it proofread 3 or 4 times. And eventually we got this story together. Out of sheer bravado, he ordered 3,000 copies that we had delivered. But his character sold these 3,000 copies. He would walk into Waterstones, talk his way into doing book launches, where he'd just walk in with a pile of books and sell to people that walked into the store. And I actually think he might be responsible for Waterstones changing their attitude towards authors and self-published authors doing book launches in Waterstones, because I did speak to one of the managing directors that said, due to very strange people coming into our stores and trying to sell their books personally, we've had to stop this thing going on. So although Stuart sold a lot of books, he also did a lot of damage for self-publishers at Waterstones. But he sold 3,000 books. He's had a fantastic, and now has written his 3rd part of the trilogy. So they're successes, and which brings us on to the failures. And I think it's unfortunately, this is completely obvious, but it's when clients come to us to self-publish their book and they haven't really thought it through, and they just assume that we're going to market, we're going to sell their book, and all you have to do is stick it on Amazon, get it on Waterstone's website, pay gardeners to list your book, and you're going to sell, and it's just not going to work. And what happens every single time is they get very angry, they get very frustrated and feel completely let down that they haven't sold a copy of the book. But when you actually sit there and discuss with them, well, what have you done to promote your book? Well, nothing, that's your job. And it's like, well, but it does need some input from you. You do need to look at social. I don't use social media. Okay, if you don't use social media, then what do? You're willing to do talks? No, I'm too nervous. Well, have you approached anyone to look at your book? No, I thought you were going to do that. Although this is part of the process that we undertake, from my point of view and from our company's point of view and the history of what we've done, it does take a hell of a lot of effort from our authors to push and promote their work. And our success stories that have only come from those authors who actually want to sell books, and it's that dichotomy. Bad books do sell if they've got really great covers, but equally to do well, you do need the full process. And I think what we bring to the table is something unique, where we try to make a beautiful book. We try to keep the voice of the author, but we work with the personality of the author to put it into a completely unique place. That's it, really. I could have listed more technical details about what we do, the editing process, but I thought it was important to explain our life and how exciting it is as a self-publishing company to work with the people that we work with, and we try and put that back on our authors as part of the process. And by that I mean enjoy it, just love what you do, have confidence, but the most important thing is enjoy selling, because it does work and it can work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. What an incredible story behind your business. It's absolutely fascinating, and your enthusiasm really comes through. That's really fantastic. We've got a few questions that have come in. The first is from Sarah, who says, I finished my first book last weekend. It's a children's book. I'm interested in knowing from the whole panel whether they think I should go the self-publishing route, try to find an agent, or use a specialist publishing company that I have to pay to edit, design and sell the book, taking a percentage of the sales. Second point, also, I have other books I want to write. Should I discuss those with interested parties so I show I'm not a one-trick pony? Mark, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, I'll try and answer it as best I can. Well, first of all, getting a book published is an incredibly difficult and onerous process. And I think really it's horses for courses. I think that you know what Dan's just very admirably described, you know, self-publishing process. You know, if you desperately want your book to be published, I would suggest that going through Daniel, who's got a very good reputation. Tricorn Books got a very good reputation. That's a very good route to go for. I think really you have to decide what you really want to do with, you know, whether, I mean, there are other, you know, getting an agent is very, very difficult. And, you know, most publishing companies, you know, if you're in the right demographic, I mean, for example, if you're Black, female, you're kind of talking about, you know, one of the authors in my publishing company, Cleanser Books, you know, she's got all the right attributes. She's Black. And this is not in any stretch of imagination pejorative. She's Black, she's female, she's young, and she's writing about rural discrimination and poverty. Now, you know, what publishers like to do is build up a profile around someone like that, whereas, you know, people like me are of less interest to them, you know, because, you know, I'm on the wrong kind of age bracket, etc. You know, I'm middle class, all those different things. So, but there are. So I think, you know, there are other voices out there, other people you can target. For example, I don't know if Sarah's heard of Impress Books, you know, based up in the Northeast, but they're a publishing company that look to try to develop new talent. So that's one of the options. You know, you know, obviously, if you do go through, and obviously Tim will have much more experience than this because I feel like still an author monkey. My book hasn't yet come out. But if you do go through, you know, the agency world, and the leading agency world is Curtis Brown, but there are lots of other agencies. You know, you have to go through, and you have to go through a process, and you could be lucky, you could not. And, you know, it's pot luck. The difference between success and failure is so minute. If you hit the right person at the right time, you know, you could be lucky, but otherwise you're not. So it depends, I think, how badly you want your book to be published. You know, if you wanted to see the light of day and you can't find easily an agent or a publisher, then I would suggest that going to someone like Tim is an excellent route. That would be my advice. But you know, or trying someone like Impress or after new writers.
Tim, you're nodding away there. Have you got anything to add? You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry. Yeah, no, Mark's summed up really well there. I can't add anything to the first part of the question. I mean, maybe just speaking to the second half of Sarah's question, where she sort of said, should I go armed with other ideas? Then yes, you know, in my experience, publishers like the idea of authors who are going to turn in more than one book. So if you can prove you're not a one-trick pony, fantastic. But the only addendum to that is publishers like being able to build a brand around an author. So if you're talking to a publisher, don't say, I've got a children's book, and in a year's time I want to write a domestic noir book, then I'm going to write a screenplay, then I'm going to translate War and Peace into Mandarin, and then I'm going to write a book of young adult poetry. They like building a brand, and that involves some continuity and some consistency. So, tell them you're going to write a second crime thriller, or better still, a second crime thriller featuring the same protagonist who is a detective, for example. So,
thank you, Charlie. Anything to add?
Very little, really. My experience of this is tiny. Self-publishing has been fantastic, and conventional publishing has been sniffy. So number 2 is finished, and I'll be on the phone to Dan as soon as I'm feeling up to it. But I again spoke to Richard Curtis's agent, name drop alert, and said, look, I finished number 2, what should I do? He said, you should keep going the way you are. You have made money. It's working very well. Why bother? Why change your route? So I will stick with self-publishing.
Another vote for Dan. Dan, anything to add?
Yeah, keep going. It's very difficult out there. Agents are very sniffy, and the one thing people don't want to talk about is it all comes down to money, and are they going to make their money back? And you have to be very honest with yourself and think, is this going to be a commercial success, or do I want to see my book published? I'm quite lucky because I see a lot of authors. It must be something about our reputation or the website. We pick up people that have been through the mill already, who have done the rounds, have been let down by agents, have been to other publishing companies who I won't name, who offer you a publishing deal, but then ask for an incredibly large check to help with costs. So you go in expecting not to pay for it, and you're getting a traditional publishing deal, when in fact it is a self-publishing deal, and you're exactly the same as a very small company around the corner. I would try everybody. I would absolutely try everybody, send a lot of letters out, get loads of feedback, get expensive quotes in from publishers, check out a few self-publishing agencies, and just think about it based on feedback you get from agents, other publishers, traditional publishers, self-publishers, and think, what do I want to invest, and what do I genuinely feel, what legs does this book have? Kids' books are fantastic at the moment, especially with lockdown. And with regard to, would I come up with 3 or 4 ideas? Definitely. With children's books, they become successful super quickly. And the first thing a child wants when they love a kid's book is they want another one. So if you can come up with 6 short stories and you have a ready-made collection, I think it's the best way to move forward.
Brilliant. Good advice there. Thank you, everybody. We've got another question here from Martin. What's your view? This is for Dan. What's your view on digital publishing? Is the book market still very much a print domain?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, particularly today. Amazon print on demand is fantastically cost effective and cheap way of publishing your book. If you have any skills whatsoever, or even if you use a self-publisher to design the book for you, you take the artwork back and you set up print on demand on Amazon. It comes across as very cheap, and you're putting yourself in exactly the same place as everyone else. But what you don't see is the quality of the work. You don't see the mistakes that have cropped in the print process, like a couple of pages being knocked out. You're not actually buying into their marketing department. All they're doing is uploading a book and somebody might buy it for you. Digital print, as opposed to litho, is an incredible process. I can guarantee the digital quality of short-run books is exactly the same as getting 3,000 books printed litho from a traditional book publisher, because they've had to meet demand for super high-quality books. And the most the saddest thing is when you go into Waterstones with a badly produced book and the book buyer looks at you and says, well, this isn't really for us. It's a great idea, but maybe consider, taking it elsewhere. It's because there's certain qualitative things that come from cheap digital printing that bookshops won't touch and basically lessen the quality of your book. I wouldn't differentiate between digital and litho book presses, but I would differentiate between print on demand and all other versions of book printing.
Thank you
if
very
that's
much.
what you meant.
Thanks, that's helpful. Does anybody have anything to add to that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, not that point, but if I can just skip back a point, I sort of agree with what people are saying about, I'm sure there are some flaky and sniffy publishers and agents out there, but I would hate people to get the impression that, the majority like that, because the ones I've met, agents are, a good agent is absolutely worth their weight in gold, and a good agent brings a huge amount of editorial insight to the process and also brings a phenomenal amount of kind of commercial astuteness to the process. So, yes, they do want to, of course, they have a commercial agenda and they will want to take, 10, 15% off you. But I guess I always took the view it's better to be left with 85% of something than have 100% of bugger all. So, agents and publishers in the traditional sector, some of them are amazing people that know a huge amount. So all I wanted to say is they're not all boogeymen or women.
Thank you, Tim. We've got a question here from Anna. It says, could you tell us a bit more about the editing process, please? How does it work and what is the author's role at this stage? How much does a book change after it goes to the editor? Tim, do you want to field that, seeing as you're still?
Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry, yeah. So that depends partly on, I think, the editor and partly on the author. It depends partly how ready the manuscript is at the point it's delivered. It's a process of negotiation, and if you get a good editor, I think there'll be a conversation about what needs to change. Good editors are good at making you change your mind without making you feel bad. Good editors are charmingly persuasive. And I think as an author, you should be, you should listen to these people, because on the whole, editors know what they're talking about. And, I feel like you probably should listen to them. But equally, good editors also understand that writers have a vision for their book, and, you're entitled to push back sometimes and be resistant to change.
Mark, anything to add on that?
Yes. Well, I think, as I said in my little talk, a good editor is absolutely essential and really vital. And you shouldn't be threatened by, having a good editor on your side. I mean, certainly, I don't think my book would be in the book it is, whether good or bad, without the editor who came in, directed me to try to make the book, to tell the story in the first person and to tell it chronologically. He was a fantastically good editor, incredibly bright guy, very sharp, meticulous with grammar and everything. But what he did, I think, was very clever. It was a very, very laborious. I mean, he spent 6 months editing the book, and what he did is he would read the chapter by chapter, and if he thought there was anything sort of wrong with the syntax, he would change it and then come back and suggest that why he was changing it. So I don't know what's happened to it. Suggesting why he was changing it. Did I agree with it? If I, most of the time I agreed with it. If I radically disagreed, I would say, look, I want this to go in. Then there were other bits which were more substantial things, and he was, as I say, incredibly hot on chronology. I mean, absolutely kind of, almost anal about it, because he kind of, for example, I don't know if anyone's read the kind of Alexandra quartets by Lawrence Durrell, but he's a Greek specialist and he loves Durrell. But there's 4 books in the Alexandra quartets, and he dissected them all, and he kind of looked at all the chronology and actually kind of said that the kind of whole chronology, and this is a very successful kind of 4 books, so that it doesn't work, it doesn't stack up, it's all wrong. Although he still admired the book. So he got me really into chronology, and I learned that from him. So I think that, a good editor, he makes you question everything. Every fact I ever said, he would come back to me and said, "Are you certain about that?" I mean, all little things. I mean, in the book, you're talking about we're talking about, say, a pop group with a record coming out in 1973, and he would say, "Look, you said that was in May. I've just looked it up. They didn't actually start till July." So all kind of little bits of detail he would always examine, and he just has incredible encyclopedic kind of knowledge. So although he was incredibly frustrating and irritating at times, because no one likes to see their kind of fine words sort of recrafted, he was very essential to the process. And in answer to the question, I don't think he really altered the things. The decisions always came back to me, and that was a clever thing. But I took his advice. If I thought he was right, I would take his advice. And certainly by using him, the book was, for good or for bad, it's a much better book with his advice that I took.
Fantastic, thank you. Question for Charlie and Dan. How do you know, if you've got an idea for a book, how do you know if it's any good and whether it's likely to be something that you can market? Charlie, do you want to take that one first?
Blimey. I had no idea if it was going to be any good. All I knew was I was writing a column, a Farmers Weekly column every day. And the Farmers Weekly column appeared to have gone very well, and been doing it since '98, and people seem to like it. That was the only guide I had as to whether it would be any good, and I think that's what made me get on and do it. And the other interesting fact is, well, as soon as I'd finished, not long after I'd finished, that nice Tim rang me up and said, "Oh, Charlie, we want to promote you to a weekly column. Do you think you could do it?" And because I'd just finished effectively a daily column, I said, yes, I could. And that's a good timing. But I had no idea whether the book was going to sell. All I knew is that people seemed to like the column, and I liked doing it. And basically, it was 365 columns.
Dan, how do you know if something's going to be marketable?
Well, I would like to say that Tim and Mark, I completely agree. Editors and publishers, they are wonderful people and they do a fantastic job. I guess I'm in the unfortunate position of dealing with people who've been through the process and had a bad time and looked for someone else. So, with regard to the question, with us, and I think in self-publishing, it's hugely instinctive. You show it to as many people as possible and you get a genuine reaction. You look at their faces, do they pass it on? Use social media to post passages, use all the social media outlets to get feedback on your work. But knowing whether a piece of writing is any good or not is, I would say, similar to a photograph or a painting. It's about the individual, and it's the spirit and the enthusiasm you put into it. You might not be a great writer, but you might inspire 10 people with what you've written in the idiom. Charlie.
Yeah, I just want to embarrass Dan hugely here. I never actually had an editor, but what we did do was massive amounts of proofreading, backwards and forwards until it was basically impossible to read the words again afresh. But my favourite story, I think, of the whole thing was, I said to Dan, just as we were finishing it, I said, "Oh, I think we ought to put a farm map in." And Dan said, "Yep, okay, I'll sort it." And I thought, "Oh, I must have already sent him a copy of our farm map." Anyway, one of them came back and they wrote the page, and there was a map of Hampshire with X. This is where Charlie's farm is. And the map of where all the fields are and the houses.
Brilliant. I'm very aware we're running a little bit tight on time. We've still got quite a few people logged in. So are the speakers, are you okay to run over for a little bit? Do you need to be anywhere?
Yeah, sure.
You okay?
That's fine.
Super job. Thank you. So we've got a question here from Michael. In terms of the discipline of writing, did the authors want to give up at any time? I appreciate Mark left his for a while after writing his first draft. I'm really impressed with the discipline of continuing a routine for such a considerable period. Are the authors normally so disciplined? Mark, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, I did. Because I mean, you know, I think one should emphasize, I don't know if everyone else would agree. I mean, writing, I mean, it's very exciting, but it's also incredibly lonely. You know, you're on your own by your computer all the time, living in your own brain day after day. You know, if you're trying to kind of invent, you know, narrative or, you know, fiction, and any kind of writing, I really admire what, you know, Charlie is a great asset to Farmers Weekly, and he writes, you know, beautifully. But, you know, if you're living with yourself all the time, and you're trying to imagine things, it's a really lonely, difficult process. And there are times that I wanted to give up, times where I wasn't enjoying it. And then suddenly you get a burst of energy and you did it. I mean, my book, you know, it's taken me 10 years to write the book. I started it 10 years ago. My first draft was, you know, 10 years ago. But the actual idea in my brain has been, you know, even beyond that. So I probably had the idea in my brain for 20 years. So it was a book. So people say, why did you write that book? It's a bit kind of grim, isn't it? Well, it's the only book that I felt I could write at that time. I got plenty of other ideas for book, but I had to get that book out of the way. But it's very arduous. And to my mind, if I hadn't have stuck to a discipline, I don't think I'd ever you know, got through the process. I mean, Tim's got a much better discipline, I think, than me, because he's writing at 6 o'clock in the morning for 2 hours. You know, I wrote it in chunks. And then what I also found, and this is the hardest thing, because it took me 2 years to write it. I mean, I was doing it weeks at a time, you know, maybe four different periods a year and going to France. But then when you start revising it, you go back to your original writing and you think, God, this is so bloody chunky. And then you start revising it. And once you start revising it, you revise the whole thing. So yeah, in answer to the question, there are times I thought I would like to give it, but it's like an obsession. You know, I never quite got the book out. Still the book's with me. And you live in that bubble all the time. And you become very, very, it's kind of isolating as well, because you kind of, you know, at the time, in the lockdown, I never spoke to my wife for 4 months, you know, practically, because I was just living company during most of the day and the book during part of the night. But, you know, it's a very enjoyable, but it's very tough. And, you know, don't be under any illusions how difficult it can be at times. That's my experience. Tim might have or Dan might have very different, or Charlie might have very different experience. Yeah, half enjoyable, half hell.
Tim, I mean, like a lot of people here, you probably spend most of your day-to-day work in front of the computer, writing articles for your day job. How do you manage that discipline of writing a book as well as the day job? You're muted.
You have to, you know, it is like Mark says, it's half bliss and half hell, really. But you have to, you know, it becomes like a sort of an itch that you just have to scratch, and it might take a year, it might take, you know, a decade, but you have to keep. You just have this sense that you have to keep going. And I mean, I've started loads of books, and they've ended up going down cul-de-sacs, and I've written, you know, the first 3 chapters of a dozen books, and they've all fizzled out. But you have this sense, if you hit on something that you feel strongly about, you just have this sense that you have to keep going with it. And, you know, it sounds like the others felt the same with their books, and that's what propels you through. In terms of a day job, you know, what keeps me disciplined and motivated is people at Farmers Weekly ringing me up saying you're late with your copy. Make sure you send it over in the next hour. So getting shouted at by Emma's much appreciated, and I always need it. So I'm not very disciplined in terms of everything, but I just got into a routine with fiction, and I knew I had to.
Anything to add, Charlie or Dan?
I think from my point of view, it's very obvious that it's necessary to offload your book. Quite often, the look on someone's face when they finally hand over the manuscripts is just of utter relief and almost tearful. And a few authors have suggested the actual process is a bit like giving birth, looking after it for month after month, and finally seeing it in print. You don't actually know what to do. Well, what am I supposed to do with this book? So although I'm not a writer, I experience the aftermath of what writers go through month after month on their own, and then finally handing it over, and that sense of, well, what happens now?
Charlie?
I got cut off there for a minute, so it was still on the same question. Discipline, yeah, well, luckily, as I keep saying, I again, did it in a completely different way. As a farmer, I'm used to piling in through the back door and kicking my boots off, washing my hands, and then writing down what I did today. And all I did was move from 25 words to 1,000. Occasionally, I came in and made rough notes of what I'd done. I thought, well, I'll come back to that later. And then look about a month later and find it completely incomprehensible. But what most of the time I managed to work out what I'd done that day by what went on either side of it. But I won't say I made up 1 or 2 days because that'd be terrible. But no, for me it was just an extension of part of farming discipline. We were all taught to keep a farm diary because it's always useful, and all I did was extend it.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got another question from Anna to all the panel. Do you revise and refine as you go along, or do you get it all down in a rough state and then refine later? Charlie, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, same again. If I don't like to get up away from the desk and the computer until I've got looking mostly right, because I and as a rule I haven't done great refinements. I go back and read it again. You know, oh gosh, did that happen? And I very rarely have to change much. I'm very pleased with the way I've managed to sit down and do it all in a burst and leave it be.
Mark?
Yeah, I revise and revise and revise. I mean, the book went to the printer about 2 weeks ago, and I was revising, an hour beforehand. You aim for so-called perfection, and you never arrive at there. You're always slightly dissatisfied because you're very pleased to have done it and you're proud of what you've done, but you always think, gosh, if only I'd use that different word, or I've repeated the same word 3 paragraphs later on. So you're always looking for that final bit of perfection. So all the time I was revising constantly, and I now can't bear to look at the book again in case I see something that I think is wrong about it. So I mean, even my publisher is rereading it again because we got the print copy to go. He's noticed 3 abject comma failures where the commas are in the wrong, and he's sort of saying that's a big mistake, and I can't even bear to look at it at the moment. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time I will be able to, but I can't. I've done with it for the moment.
Tim, do you kind of sketch out a plot, or do you just go straight into it?
Yeah, I do. I did sketch out a plot. When I started writing it, it changed quite substantially from what I'd sketched out. But sketching out the plot gave me the confidence to start it, and it kind of gave me a route map to get into it. And yeah, I like going back to stuff and refining it and editing it. And I like going back to it, having left a little bit of time from having written it. I like to do other things and, read other things and write other things. And I find that if I leave a bit of time and space, I can go back to it with a more objective eye than if I tried to refine and edit it an hour or a day later. So sometimes it helps to put it away for a month and then go back. And, sometimes you also find the story that you're trying to write in the editing.
Dan, what do you find is the kind of best practice from working with different writers?
Wow. Well, what does happen is it's being revised all the way through to going onto the press. And once it's on the press and you explain that it's finished, there's nothing more you can do. There is always one more email that says, I've just found a real biggie, and you have to call the printer and you have to stop the press and you have to change that page. It's just going to happen. I have a frustrating habit of wanting to lay books out at once as it comes in its raw condition, because I want to feel it, I want to see it, I want to judge the typeface. And because I do that at the beginning, I'm more than happy to take it on the chin at the end of the book that, revisions will carry on to the last possible moment, because sometimes visions change. I've literally had to change a book from A4 landscape to A4 portrait because they didn't like the look of it. And you have to say, yep, let's just do it. You know, and if as soon as you start saying no in publishing, I think you've had it. You know, you do have to just keep saying yes, let's do it, because I totally agree with you both. You know, you can always improve. You'll always find something, and sometimes it might be a change as opposed to an improvement, but that one change might sit in your head forever when you look at that printed book.
Gosh. A question here for Mark and Tim. How do you research your books to ensure that they feel real?
Do you want me to start?
Go for it.
All right. Yeah, well, a lot of my book, there wasn't an awful lot of research in it, because a lot of it was using my own kind of background experience and kind of, inventing it. There was a certain amount of research. I mean, I've never been a psychiatric nurse. I'm interested in psychiatry. So there's a lot of descriptions about psychiatry in the book. I mean, that's something that is interesting to me. And I have worked in a psychiatric hospital, and I have run psychiatric clubs. But I did actually talk to, I talked to one or two people, for example, there's a psychiatric nurse who's worked in hospitals who also knew, and this is a kind of a key element of the book, because there is a kind of a murder in the book, and this is quite a complicated murder involving insulin. So it's very important that I have to get that kind of completely and utterly right, and there are, without kind of, in case you want to read the book, but there are two forms of insulin. There's fast, rapid-acting insulin and fast-acting insulin. They both perform slightly different roles. And in the part of the plot in the book is that the nurse, in order to murder his patient, he swaps the insulin. And it was very important to be very, very precise about that. So we went through, I saw lots and lots of advice over that key bit of the book, and even up to the last thing, there were questions being asked about me. So, and I did kind of research that quite a lot. I mean, obviously I was writing a lot of the time about the backdrop, it's journalism, publishing. So I was using my own background, but really inventing it. Anyone who worked on the Sheffield Star, which I worked in, the editor was having an affair. Well, as far as I'm aware, he never had affairs, but I really hammed that up. So, I'll probably have to consult kind of libel lawyers on Monday, but that was fun. I kind of enjoyed that fun aspect of it.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, my lead character in What She Left was a mid-20-something-year-old woman, and I'm a mid-something-year-old man. So I was very conscious that I was, putting myself in a very different place. So I talked to, a lot of friends of mine are women in their 20s, and I badgered my friends and asked them what music they were listening to at the moment. And I sense check a lot of the decisions I sort of make on behalf of my characters with people who are of that age and of that sex and of that background. And I also, the other thing I did, interestingly, was I read, I don't know if it was any use, but it was certainly quite eye-opening, was I read a lot of women's magazines for a year. I would read Marie Claire and Cosmopolitan, and I think I got some funny looks, and I was sitting on trains reading a Cosmopolitan article called 10 Steps to the Perfect Orgasm on the train going into Sutton. So, but yeah, you have to just try and immerse yourself in the kind of psyche of your character, and after a while, if you do it right, after a while they start making the decisions for you and kind of almost telling you what they should be doing. So
Charlie.
Yeah, going back to Mark's point about the research, and it's just a general, it's not really related to tonight, but there's one of the distinguishing features of some of the books that are written about modern farming is, and excuse my French, the bullshit that they're happy to print. Some of these books, I don't know if anybody checks them or their editors check them, but they can write the most outrageous things about what farmers do. And there's one in particular I read, and I've only got halfway through it, and I made notes. And every single time something you say, well, that's not possible, that's not right. That just wouldn't, you physically couldn't do what you are claiming to do in your book about being a temporary farmer. And what amazes me is that these books make their way into the best-selling columns, and they'll make their way onto Countryfile, they'll make their way into the literary supplements. And it just breaks my heart that there's nobody, I suppose that's why I ended up doing my book, was because these books are out there being hugely popular, going, oh, isn't it terrible what farmers are doing? Anyway, that's off my chest. Thank you, I feel better.
Thank you for that. I'm really aware that time is very tight. I was just going to wind up with one final question for all of the panel. If you could give everybody here just one tip, what would it be? Mark, I'll put you on the hot seat.
Gosh, perseverance. I think you need perseverance above everything.
Okay, that's a good one. Daniel?
Be yourself, be natural, keep your voice, just be you, just be honest. I know that was 6 things, but be you.
6 short things, that's all right. Tim?
Don't send Kit Kats to editors.
Charlie, to finish up.
Well, obviously read lots of cosmopolitan magazines.
That's a mental picture I'm not going to get out of my head for a little while. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming together tonight. Thank you, Tim, for being sort of having the brainchild for this. It's been really fascinating insight. And yeah, thank you also for sticking around a little bit longer. I shall let you get on and have your supper, but lots of comments coming in saying thank you from everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.